Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Larry Siegel. I'll be acting as your host today. I'm glad you could join us. Today, we're going to have a roundtable discussion about using usage data analytics and using that in order to build a more strategic plan. And let's get started with a little housekeeping. We're going to have a roundtable discussion. We'll introduce our panelists in just a moment. And as we're going and answering questions that we have set up, if you have questions, please go ahead. I'm sure you know how to do this by now. It's been years now we've been doing this. But if you have any questions, just and ask them in the Q&A box, and we'll try to get to those questions. If we don't, we'll keep track of who asked the questions and get back to you in a timely manner with some answers. So thank you for that. And let's go ahead and meet our panelists. We have two panelists today. First is Josh Barstow, Chief Revenue Officer for OpenVault. Josh is a seasoned executive of technology and services within the telecom field and MSO industry, currently serving, as you can see, as the Chief Revenue Officer for OpenVault. He has a focused expertise in broadband, and prior to OpenVault, he served as VP of Advanced Services and Operations for MetroCast. We're glad to have him. Thank you very much, Josh. And just a quick word about OpenVault. As you saw, for those who joined early, we are a market-leading source of broadband technology solutions and data-driven insights into individual provider and worldwide broadband consumption patterns that empower cable, fiber, and wireless broadband operators to improve their network management. We look at millions of subscriber usage data records in order to provide analysis and insight to help providers create a better experience and find additional revenue, as well as better network management. And we'll talk about that. We unlock the power of data. And in particular, with two overall categories: network optimization, diagnostics, and monetization and customer engagement. And here are some of the solutions that we provide. And joining us from VantagePoint is Nathan Weber. Nathan has been active in the industry since 2000. His primary focus is on the technology and regulatory aspects of independent local exchange carriers, or ILECs. He's involved from the development of feasibility studies based on site-specific cost estimates to the design and project management of several statewide telecom network deployments. He's designed and implemented voice, data, video networks, as well as packet optical transport, carrier Ethernet transport, dense wavelength, division multiplexing, synchronous optical networking, and multi-protocol label switching, as well as FTTP and DLC and wireless networks. There's not a network or broadband acronym he hasn't encountered or employed in his work. So Nathan, thank you so much for joining us. Just a quick word about VantagePoint, an employee-owned organization. They offer start to future solutions under one roof. And on the left-hand side, you could see the different areas of focus that VantagePoint provides. And they believe better broadband means better lives. It helps clients deliver on that promise through start to finish engineering and consulting services, customized to meet your unique needs and goals from due diligence to deployment and beyond. It's about future looking, and that's what we're going to be talking about today: strategic planning through data-driven analytics. The company itself has a high degree of vision in putting employees and clients first, believing, as we talked about, better broadband means better lives, building networks for applications that don't even exist yet because of their forward-looking nature, and in giving back to local industry and global communities. VantagePoint. But enough about us. Let's talk about your favorite subject. Let's talk about you. We're in a world where providers are converting from DOCSIS to fiber. They're expanding, or you're expanding, and looking at build out to rural subscribers. You're especially with the infrastructure package that is now being talked about after having been passed, identifying subscribers with the greatest likelihood of upgrading to drive satisfaction and revenue. We'll talk a bit about that and some of the trends and changes very specifically going on in networks. you need to increase your overall ARPU and clearing network congestion of usage of users. And how can you do that? How can you meet the demands of those power users? And there are power users as people are upgrading usage levels as well as their speed tiers. How can you increase customer satisfaction, drive, as we talked about, higher ARPU? How can you protect your network, both from malicious activities as well as growth and congestion? And then most importantly, how can you plan for growth opportunities? Strategic analysis of usage data answers this. Where's your traffic coming from? Where is it going? Where are the issues and why? And what does that mean for the future of your network? So let's kick off by getting you involved a little bit and asking you kind of a table setting question. So we're going to start with poll number 1. Here's the question. How confident are you in your current network plan? Let's share the results. Well, as you can see, the majority of folks are somewhat confident in the network planning. Some are very confident. And then some, not very confident at all. Well, let's talk about how to build even greater confidence levels as we get into it. And let's start off as we jump in with a question for Josh. And we're going to turn this off so we can look and be a little more human. Josh, before we even begin talking about strategic planning for future build outs, what kind of usage analytics are there and how can this, oh, actually I need to restart this because I think you had wanted to share a slide. So the question is, what kind of usage analytics are there and how can this help providers?
Thanks, Larry. Yeah, subscriber usage analytics is an interesting topic because if you think back how you planned a network even 10 years ago, we used to plan it based on kind of CAGR growth, 35 to 40% aggregated expected growth, and just plan it at the hardware level and say, you know, that's what we'll do, and we'll adjust to that as it comes forward. Now, you know, with some of our software tools, we're able to get down to, you know, drill all the way down that network, all the way to the household, and look at the individual subscriber. And what you see is that you see that there's not an even shared growth of usage. Subscribers, you know, still fit into different buckets, as this chart shows. You know, you had low usage bandwidth customers grow, but just over time, especially over the last 3 to 4 years, with all the different variations of technology and high intensity applications that have happened, and as well as the continued adoption of devices in the household, it really are pushing the usage into a much higher category. People are just on time, are on network a lot longer than they used to be. And as this chart shows, obviously over 500% increase in subscriber growth. This is the real big one though. You know, the bottom, if you look at the bottom tier first, you know, those are your low users. That used to account for about half your network, and that has dropped off dramatically. The median users have increased, and then this bucket of higher users, you know, is becoming the norm. Here it just shows over a 200% increase in people that are using over 500 gigabytes a month, which used to be twice what we used to consider a power user. Back when we started measuring a lot of this, you know, we talked about power users being in that 250 gigabyte range. And now you have, you know, well over 30% of your network exceeding that. We always talk about speed and usage going hand in hand. And so, you know, it's a chicken and egg theory, right? What pushed usage up? Was it the adoption of applications, or was it the fact that, you know, higher speeds and better technology became available for the usage people? I think it's both. You know, there's a couple different ways operators have sold services to customers. It used to be there was kind of a plotted out plan to have your subscriber gradually increase over time. But as technology increased, it became kind of an arms war of who could get the higher packages out the door first. And so a lot of operators did a few things. They either made the value proposition to move to a higher tier very, very attractive, or they actually just sunset some smaller packages and pushed all the users up into higher speed tiers, and it showed out to be good. And it's a very good model, because what you do is you create a much better experience for the user. You put them in a package that oversubscribes their use, and it gives them a better performance and a better package and better experience with the company. Here this shows clearly that you look at just as far back as a couple of years ago, and you had a quarter of your network using less than 50 megabits per second. Half your people were using less than 100 megabits per second. And a lot of operators either made those legacy packages and stopped selling them, or, like I said, complimentary upgrades to customers, where now that number is less than 20%. I mean, that's a significant impact on your customer. So as you move customers up the speed tiers, it is hand in hand going to happen with their usage is going to increase as well, which leads into stress on your network. So what's that do? How do you monetize that? That's another way to look at it. And so we look at those lower customers that still exist. I mean, most operators didn't shut off lower packages. They stopped selling them to new customers, but they left legacy customers in place. So you may have someone who's been a good customer for 5 to 7 years of their life cycle, and they may be sitting on a 25 megabit per second package. Those customers are ripe to be upgraded. They're probably paying a lower price than your new premier packages are today. So it's an obvious upgrade candidate for your company to sell to, and with that becomes a series of improvements, both in higher ARPU for the company, but a better experience for the customer. Put those two things together, and you end up with less phone calls into care, less truck rolls into the field, and a much more satisfied customer overall.
Thank you, Josh. And a question did come in about where is this data coming from? And the answer is this is coming from OpenVault. Every quarter has a quarterly business insights report, or OVBI. And this is coming from stuff that just came out of our Q3, which will be available for download shortly. So check out our site, openvault.com. We did do a webinar about a week or so ago, and that's been recorded and is available for watching if you want to get more previews with more interesting data. But the report itself will be available, and if you're interested, we can send that out to you proactively to those on this call, so you can get the hard copy report filled with more information like this. Before we go on, we have a question coming up for Nathan. Let's do our second of 3 polls. So get ready, crack your knuckles. Here it comes. Poll number 2. At this point, to what degree of analytics like this, the kind we just talked about, do you use for network management and planning? So what's your current level of data analytics? Is it you never use specific usage data analytics, occasionally, often, or you're an extremely heavy user of subscriber usage analytics? This is the foundation for the strategic planning that we'll be talking about. Thank you very much. And here's what we learned from the participants on this call. Occasionally, over half of you occasionally, often for a third of you, and 5% on both sides of never using it or extremely heavy users of it. So let's talk about the importance of data sharing and network management. So next question will go to you, Nathan. When conducting strategic network planning, why is it important to understand network utilization and growth trends?
I think that's a great question, and I want to start off with a little anecdote. The other day, my wife showed me a picture of a sign that read, "Don't look back, you're not going that way." Well, I think it's kind of a snappy slogan. I really don't think it's good advice when it comes to strategic planning. In fact, in my opinion, I think it's very important to look back and look at trends historically on your network when you're putting together a strategic network plan. It tends to be that those trends seem to be some of the best predictors that we have as we're trying to project and predict our future growth for the networks. When you have good data, and I want to stress the term good data, your ability to forecast future growth in your various network segments, and those might include your last mile access network. It could include your core data network or even your optical transport network. Your ability to project that future growth in those network segments is greatly enhanced. Good data allows you to predict when you're going to reach capacity on some of your existing network segments or network elements. It's going to allow you to predict when that equipment or those networks are going to be exhausted and need to be replaced, and give you really an idea of when we need to start planning and making those network upgrades. Good data also gives you a vision and allows you to project forward what your long-term capacity and bandwidth requirements are going to be, so that when you are modernizing your network, when you're making those upgrades, you can properly size them to meet your long-term network goals and to meet those customer requirements for the long term. You know, VantagePoint conducts strategic network planning, and for our various clients, we tend to utilize data like the network utilization statistics, like growth trends as key components in this overall planning process. We typically take the data that's made available to us by the clients and try to project forward. What does that bandwidth look like, not just next year, but 3 years, 5 years, 7 years from now? And we take it in terms of a couple of different veins. One is we look at their existing operations, their existing broadband service territories, and try to project out what are their bandwidth needs going to be to serve those legacy markets, those legacy areas. But in addition to that, we talk to our clients about some of their strategies on edging out and entering into new broadband markets, and trying to take some of this historical data and these historical trends that they have in their legacy operations and use it to predict what they're going to need in these new markets. And so the combination of their legacy markets and their new markets allows us to really take a look at, from an overall perspective, from a big picture plan, what are you going to need to be able to support network-wide and from market to market. And that really has the potential to influence a lot of the things we do with these strategic network plans. It has a potential for influencing the overall network design. It has a potential for influencing the technology that we select to deliver these services to the end user. And certainly it does impact the overall cost estimates to make these network upgrades as we look forward to really the long-term plan of their network.
Thank you very much. Josh, question for you. Talked about the big picture there toward the end of Nathan's answer. Earlier, we talked about solutions that gather granular subscriber usage data from, and from that, providers can get into the strategic planning along the lines of what Nathan was just talking about. And you gave us an example, as I just pointed out, with the identifying potential upgrade candidates. So let's dive in a little bit further on the data analytics side, the data usage side. What is it that's actually going on in terms of gathering this data? How is this accomplished? And tell us a bit about the process.
We start at the household and work our way up through the network, right? Every CPE device that we monitor in a house produces a set of data records. We capture those data records and look at trending and how much usage that actually produces. So we kind of move it that way. And then we aggregate as we move up. And then if you look at it from, as Nathan discussed, a network congestion standpoint, it's really a grouping of your subscribers. How much traffic are they using? How much data are they pulling? And then within that subset of customers, you may have a couple anomalies that don't necessarily dictate, an expensive plan. For example, you might have a 250 customer subset, but if you look down at each of those 250 customers, 245 of them may be what we consider fair use customers doing normal traffic, falling within the profile of a traditional customer that you expect, right? And then you might have 5 customers of that 250 who are just off the charts, right? These are power users that are doing something outside your acceptable use policy as an operator. Maybe they're signed up as a residential customer and they're running a business out of their basement. Or maybe out of those 5 customers, you have 1 customer that is just clearly doing something egregious, and just generating a tremendous amount of bandwidth, far exceeding the other 249 on your network. And so what that creates is a problem, because traditionally you would look at that 250 subscriber subset as one, and you would treat them as one grouping of bandwidth, and you would act on that accordingly. So what we're able to do today is you break that down, you figure out which ones are, power users. We used to call them troublemakers, or causing an issue, and you can address them individually. And in a cable network where it's a DOCSIS network and bandwidth is kind of shared, you can move that customer off the network altogether and make them a fiber customer. You can put them in a commercial services package. There's a number of things you can do to treat that individual customer as opposed to the larger subset of 250. At the end of the day, that would save, that would really extend your capital spend as an operator. Maybe you stretch out, thousands of dollars of network fixes over a few years by addressing one or two customers individually, as opposed to addressing that group as a whole.
Thank you. And speaking of that granularity, going back to you, Nathan, what are the benefits to understanding these trends on that per market, per node, or per subscriber basis?
Yeah, so when we look at a lot of our clients, we have companies that have access to detailed data on a per market, per node, or even per customer basis. We have others that don't. And a company that merely has high level data, more macro level data, things like what is our total bandwidth going out to our upstream ISPs, or what is our average bandwidth per broadband sub at peak time? That information can be used to trend things out, but it really only allows us to make broad network wide, predictions of what our bandwidth requirements are going to be. That might help us to look at certain network segments like our core data network. It might help us look at, for smaller operators, perhaps their optical transport network, and determine, what are their long-term needs in the future. But it really doesn't give us the visibility and the understanding that we need to make real good network decisions for those network segments that are closer to that customer. So a company that has more precise data, more detailed data on a per market or per node or per subscriber basis, they can make more precise forecasts. They can look at how things are growing, from a very granular approach. And that helps companies to make sure that they're investing in right-sized networks, to make sure that rather than taking a broad brush at this and making network investments in every market, I was specifically focusing those on areas where they're seeing growth and making adjustments where they're seeing customer demand dictate that. When we look at from an access network perspective, that last mile connection to the customer, I think you can really break this into two different real scenarios, for our customer base and how we treat things. One is those customers of ours that are 100% fiber based or very close to that, right? Having information on a per market or per node or per subscriber basis isn't going to really dictate a lot of plans as far as major network investments. As Josh talked about, it might help guide us in making some subtle changes to move customers from one node to another, or putting them off on their own so that they're not impacting other customers on shared network segments. But it's not going to impact major network upgrades. In other words, if we're already fiber, we're not going to try to figure out what areas we're going to further fiber, right? We're already there. It probably has a bigger impact, as Josh talked about before, from a marketing perspective, being able to identify what the appropriate speed packages are that we need to offer to our customers, being able to identify which of those customers are prime candidates to really market to and try to bump up to the next speed tier because they're maxing out their existing subscribed broadband connection. Now, when we look at things from different access technologies, ones that I consider to be more bandwidth restricted access technologies, things like DSL or fixed wireless, or some could argue that in certain cases, some DOCSIS deployments would fall into that category. I think those details and the analytics that we would have on a per market, per node, or per subscriber basis are far more key when it comes to network planning. It's going to allow us to look at where we have the highest concentration of users that are maxing out their broadband connection on a consistent basis, and maxing out their broadband connection to the point that we just cannot provision them anymore because of the limitations of that technology. That allows us to look at those specific areas where we have the highest concentration of customers and make some well-informed decisions about how to prioritize these markets, where we want to make those network investments to build fiber or to make other investments so that we can alleviate these bottlenecks and really take care of this pent-up demand that the customers have.
Thank you. Thanks for this, describing those two scenarios. Josh, we talked a bit about getting a granular per subscriber. On an earlier answer, a question came in, I just wanted to address. We had talked about the way monitoring every device in the house. And the question came in, is that an OpenVault device? And the answer is no. We're able to look through the modem into the Wi-Fi network and look at device usage. We're 100% cloud-based software solution. Nevertheless, we are gaining visibility into usage. So along those lines, what are some of the analyses providers can perform with that data that leads to the enablement of strategic planning, such as the kind that Nathan was just talking about? In other words, what are the issues that OpenVault solutions are addressing to help get more out of the network and plan for future?
Right. It's a good question. Excuse me. There's a couple ways to look at that, right? So Nathan hit on a great point. I just wanted to go back to that for a second because it really is kind of a macro level of using subscriber data analysis. And to his point, if I focus back on cable for a minute, and you look at some of these rural markets, these tier 2, tier 3s, folks that are outside, congested settings, and they're going through a transition right now of trying to figure out, do they spend money on, a DOCSIS 3.1 upgrade, or do they, just move off of DOCSIS together and start building fiber? And so to Nathan's point, it's exactly the kind of analysis that our systems provide is, as you see this trended growth over time, at some point you sit down with the finance side of the house and make a determination. What's the next 5 years of that area going to look like? And if your determination is, consistent slow growth, then you're kind of okay to move with the plan that you've always had. But if you see, for example, maybe there's a school going up, maybe this is kind of a hot new town that people are moving to off an area, then maybe it makes sense, as Nathan said, maybe you overbuild yourself completely and you put in fiber and you really create that future-proof network for that area. But you do that through the aggregation of subscriber data from our tools. And so it's an interesting combination of concepts that we were talking about. So I just wanted to reach back and touch on that quickly. But maybe you could repeat the first part of your question, Larry.
Right. Here's the question. 2 trains leave Chicago, one heading east, one heading... No, that's not the question. Here's the question. What are the issues? And we've addressed some of them, but what are the issues that the OpenVault solutions are addressing that that providers are facing?
So there's a couple issues. Network congestion is kind of always the heartbeat of what we do, right? We pull data, we analyze your network, your access network, and we tell you where you have choke points, where you're healthy, where your subscribers are doing things. And basically, in a nutshell, you can go from looking at your entire access network to a subscriber in 3 clicks of our tool. But at the same time, you look, what we found over the last few years is that the data we collect and analyze, if we look at it a different way, it becomes very, very powerful on the business side. So on the marketing side, and ideally, we're able to provide this. Not only do we provide a network health component to what we do, but we also provide a ARPU generation, a revenue growth engine for the customers. And everything kind of centers around the same thing, right? What is the subscriber doing, and are they in the right package for their needs? And the only way to evaluate that is to look at their usage over time. And so we'll plot out, a year's worth of data on a subscriber, and we'll watch it grow. And then, at some point we can look back and see the provision package from the operator. We can see the amount of devices behind the gateway in the house. We have an application that looks at a protocol level of a device. And so we can tell whether they have 5 wireless devices or they have 25 wireless devices. And all of that leads into the conversation of, when somebody calls into care and says, my internet's slow, the generic statement, my internet's slow, your bandwidth isn't good. What we want to do is provide the person on the phone a whole bunch of touch points that they can reflect on to make a determination whether there's an engineering issue that needs to be addressed, or in a lot of cases, as we touched on with that 20%, upgrade candidate pool, a lot of times a customer will, I think I always used to say, customers never call in to say, wow, your internet's great. They only call in to talk about your problem. So if you are a good customer, you've been around for 5 to 8 years, there's a very high likelihood you have outgrown the package you purchased. And so as you start to complain about slow speeds, what you really might be doing is identifying the fact that you have a whole house full of HD TVs now, or 4K TVs, you're running gaming boxes, you have 5 or 6 handheld devices, you got video cameras, you have smart speakers in your house, and all of that is running through the same pipe that you originally purchased. So when that call goes into tech support to say, or to care to say, wow, your internet is slow, the answer really is, well, I'm glad you called, you're a great customer. Our internet isn't slow, you've just outgrown what you bought. Let me provide you a series of upgrade options for you that make you much happier. And what we find is, for what turns out to be, $5 to $10 a month in revenue or in spend from the customer, at this point of technology is probably, quadrupling their speed. They might go from 25 megabits per second to 500 megabits per second, at which point that customer is so much happier with their experience that you've created a much stickier customer, and they won't be calling back into tech support, and you will not be sending out truck rolls. So all this, our data provides tentacles into all areas of an operation, where traditionally we were an engineering tool. Now we're a marketing tool, now we're a finance tool, and we're a customer care tool. All of it's using that same pool of data from the household.
Thank you very much. Taking from that granularity to the broader, Nathan, this is kind of a big fundamental question like we just asked Josh, and that is, why is it important to even develop a network strategic plan?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question. And fortunately, I think, most of our audience, based on the initial poll result, I think most of our audience understands the importance of it, and most of them are actually participating in putting together a strategic plan. But I think there's a few main points that I want to make here and talk about. One is, it seems like in today's world, broadband service providers are under increasing pressure to operate more efficiently. And we need to make sure that we're making wise investments. One of the challenges that we have is making sure that we are proactive instead of reactive. Certainly some companies can occasionally fall into the trap of they have an immediate need that they need to address, and they focus on fixing that particular issue without any consideration of the big picture. And so they make a network investment, they make that correction, and then a couple of years from now, they are in the same boat and they have facing another challenge and making additional investments. And that's not a very efficient way to operate. One of the benefits of strategic planning is really making sure that we have this comprehensive network plan, that we're building towards something. So that as those issues come up and those bottlenecks appear, we can take a look at it and say, not only how can we correct this near term, but how are we building this towards our long-term vision? And that allows us to be more efficient with our investments. No company wants to be inefficient. No company wants to spend money needlessly, but especially for small service providers, they can't afford to make mistakes when it comes to these investments. So I think it's important to take the time and make the investment in the strategic plan to ensure that we're as efficient as possible looking forward. Another benefit that I see, and I think this is really timely from a benefit discussion, is the fact that we're in this world right now where there is a lot of money being made available via grant programs, whether we're talking about federal or state grant programs. And companies that put together a strategic vision and understand not just what are we doing within our existing legacy service territory, but what is our bigger picture view of where do we want to grow to? What markets do we want to expand into? Understanding that and coming up with a plan, especially when you're talking about rural unserved markets, having that plan, developing a high level design, understanding what it's going to cost, understanding what the feasibility looks like, really gives you a leg up to say, when a program is announced and funding becomes available, how do we best fit that particular funding source, and how do we leverage those dollars to be able to expand our footprint and make this more feasible. The last thing I want to say is I think the true benefit of strategic planning is giving us the ability to put together a long-term budget. So we're trying to understand what changes we're going to make in our network and in what sequence and in what years over the next 3 or 5 or 7 years. And that really enables us to put together a long-term budget. The inherent benefit of that is then our finance people can take that long-term budget and do some long-term financial forecasting and make sure that these decisions and these plans for our network are really helping to benefit and ensuring the health and viability of our company in the long term. So between those three things, understanding that we're building towards a future plan, that we're ready for these broadband funding sources, and that we're ensuring, from a long-term, budget planning, a long-term financial forecasting, that the health of our company is going to continue to be strong throughout.
Thank you very much. And Josh, last question I have is for you, and just kind of going back toward the tail end of your answer about the different departments that could benefit from one of the solutions, and actually just asking you to talk a bit more about that, specifically what departments can benefit from data analysis and the data-driven strategic planning that Nathan's talking about. So as you look at the organization, and you've certainly served in this capacity, who can benefit from this? If for people on the call coming from different areas of the company.
Right. Actually, I think you can turn the question around and say, is there anybody that doesn't benefit from this kind of analysis? As I talked about before, when I was a customer of OpenVault back in 2014, 15, it was primarily a tool we used in engineering and access planning. Today, we have an application that sits primarily in customer care. It looks specifically at devices in the network, in the access network. So from the CMTS or from the OLT down to the CPE. And then we have that also looks at stuff in the home. So you can make an analysis there. So that's a care tool. That's a NOC, a network operations center tool. And then we take all of this data, and we put it back together in a sense that makes sense to the business person. And we'll use a case study of an operator that we dealt with in the last couple of years, who were launching gig services across their footprint, but in silos. And so the engineering folks were trying to remedy a network that was heavily congested, and the marketing folks were launching gig services, as if it was on paper. And then when we put the two teams together, it was almost as if they never talk, and so we kind of were able to help them strategize their launch plan so that marketing followed engineering, and that engineering put useful time and money in places for the reason of supporting marketing's launch. And so you combine those two forces together in a company, and all of a sudden things become very powerful and concise, as opposed to groups doing their own thing. But and then the monetization side is something that often goes overlooked with our tools, and it really shouldn't. The mid-play, as we've hit on a few times, we can look at 20 to 25% of every single operator we serve and point out a list of customers that should be upgraded. right? But something we didn't touch on, not all operators have the ability, either financially or organizationally, to just keep rebuilding networks time over time. So we offer a rating and charging tool, right? In this tool, we set bandwidth caps, and they can be, very generous, but they are caps. And then as the tool monitors the usage of subscribers, it takes you to that cap level, and then you pay for an overage of that cap, and that everyone talks about it in the sense of, well, why are you penalizing customers for using your data? And that's not at all the intent of the tool. The intent of the tool is to get the folks who are using 10, 20 times the allocated bandwidth off your network, essentially, just because in these certain scenarios, they're just doing more harm than they will ever be able to pay for. And so we have statistics on our website and in some of our white papers that show how dramatically different network usage is on places where we have caps set and acceptable use policies in place versus networks that are just wide open, all you can eat, take what you can get, networks.
Well, thanks. And just as a follow-up to Nathan, would you also say that there are multiple departments that can benefit from the kind of strategic network planning that we've discussed here?
I think absolutely. I think, when you talk about making these network investments, certainly the technical and the operations side of the house needs to be involved to understand, where they're at, where they're going. Certainly finance is going to see benefits from conducting this planning, even marketing, understanding here are the markets that we're going to enter into, here's the markets we're going to up. Getting all these parties together and talking and working in lockstep with one another, I think, is critical for these companies. And like Josh mentioned, there too often we see disconnects there, and some of the real benefits of the strategic planning process is to get everybody, rowing in the same direction again.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, guys. Those are the questions that I have for now. We had some Q&A come in, so stand by for that. But first, we're going to take us to poll number 3. This is our last poll of the day. Okay, here comes poll number 3. Based on what you saw, what we talked about, would you say your organization is undervaluing the need for subscriber analytics for planning and needs to invest in it, is in a good place with its use of usage analytics for planning, or is over-reliant on usage analytics? Are you undervaluing? Are you in a good place? Or you've had enough of it, quite frankly? The poll is closed. Here's what you said. A little more than a third of you believe you're undervaluing the need for subscriber analytics, and more than half are pretty good place. Pretty good place. No one feels they're over-reliant on usage analytics, which I think really is the most important thing here. So we talked about a lot of different solutions today. We just wanted to highlight a couple of them that came up. Starting with OpenVault, one solution by name that we have is the OpenVault Traffic Analyzer solution. And this, again, is cloud-based, as we talked about before, and it looks at data and enriches it. And we can classify all the traffic to help you with that planning for a better network. And I'll give you an example of that. But here you can see it's not just categorizing, but identifying traffic that's a threat. And it gives you real-time visibility into traffic for better capacity planning and, to Nathan's heart, long-term network management. And this is kind of a zoom in on the kind of enrichment that we can do by looking at the different categorization. And it's virtually limitless the ways that we can categorize data. The other solution we wanted to talk about briefly is Josh talked a bit about those that are over provisioned, so to speak. And we have something called speed clipping. And speed clipping lets you identify in near real time subscribers with usage behavior approaching the speed of their service packages. And essentially, these are upgrade candidates. So it's almost an easy way of finding low-hanging fruit to improve the customer experience as well as ARPU. And you could filter it in a number of ways. And from a big picture for VantagePoint, it's the strategic planning that they provide, multifunctional guidance for management, boards, and staff, the different departments that we just talked about. So as I mentioned, a couple questions did come in, and the first one is for Nathan. Nathan, planning, this was in quotes, by the way, planning is a project that doesn't really end. What is the end goal of using this data to build a strategy?
Yeah, and I think they, really put it in true terms that planning never ends. Oftentimes when we're putting together a strategic plan for clients, we encourage them to revisit that every year or two because things change, right? Market dynamics change. Subscriber needs change. Perhaps a new opportunity came up that they want to take advantage of. So, I think it's important that even though planning never truly ends, we need to have a plan to build towards, but also to have the nimbleness to understand that we might have to change course from time to time. Certainly I subscribe to the theory that chance favors the prepared mind.
Well, I think you seem very well prepared today. Question for you, Josh. I understand the benefits of understanding what's happening in my network, but those benefits are hard to quantify. Outside of that, what are the other benefits? How can I monetize it?
We've touched on a couple points about how you monetize the subscriber growth. And again, it's like a broken record, right? Upgrades. That is where, as a financial side of the company, that is where operators make their money, right? At the end of the day, you are a business that sells service to a customer that pays for it. If you're able to get that customer to pay more for your service on a monthly basis, the aggregation of that revenue, certainly helps your company out. And I think a key point to discuss in the upgrades, and I skipped over it earlier, is that this is really a fixed cost upgrade, right? There's no expense that comes with upgrading your customer other than your time of your employee to speak to them and educate them on what they need. You've done the provisioning once, and so from your business, you're able just to increase their speed from 25 megabits per second to 500 megabits per second, online, and push that down to your modem, and your customer instantaneously, receives the benefit of the work. So it's not only a revenue increase, but it's a free cash increase that basically coincides one for one. And then the flip side of it is, the expense savings, something, near and dear to my heart as well. A happier customer calls in to support less. A happier customer doesn't need service calls as often. A happier customer doesn't bother your employees with their issues. They sit and they enjoy your service and they find it to be a good value proposition. So again, on both sides of the coin, you're saving expense and you're increasing revenue and increasing customer satisfaction. You really can't hit three more hot topic buttons than that.
Thank you. And okay, the last question, as we're coming up on the hour, timing is good, is for Nathan. My board has a tendency to, and you actually touched on this a bit, my board has a tendency to be more reactive than proactive. What have you seen as strong arguments to convince boards to proactively analyze and plan?
Yeah, I think some of the arguments that have already, put forth during this webinar, I think hold true. One is, certainly companies that are reactive, and putting Band-Aids in place, Band-Aid upon Band-Aid upon Band-Aid. When you look at things long-term, that strategy can actually cost more money than to have a plan and build towards that plan. And so one of the arguments I always make to boards is if you really truly want to be efficient, if you really truly want to improve the bottom line of the company, then having a plan like this in place is very critical. The second piece that's probably more pertinent over the last year or so, and will be pertinent looking forward, is having that plan allows you to be nimble enough to take advantage of some of these funding programs. Having that plan allows you to go out and seek grant funding and expand your service territory and bring in additional revenues, being able to leverage some of the sunk fixed costs that you already have in staff, in certain aspects of your network, and be able to spread that cost amongst more subscribers. And that, again, will help companies be more financially viable long term.
Well, thank you very much. I think that is the perfect way to end our discussion today. And a special thank you, of course, to Josh and to Nathan for their insights and thoughts, and for answering your questions. If you have specific questions about some of the solutions that you saw today, or the services that each organization provides, there's contact information there. And have yourself a great rest of your day. Thanks again.